to Mental Health Momentum, a Silicon Slopes podcast. I'm Dr. David Morgan. I'm a licensed psychologist and the Director of Mental Health Awareness here at Silicon Slopes. And on this podcast, we talk about mental health issues in business and beyond, and we look for solutions. Let me introduce my guest to you today. This is Mike Batt. Hello, Mike.
Hi.
Mike.
Glad to be here.
Mike, you're Mike. Let me tell you about Mike. He is the CEO and founder of Healthy Mind Map and Healthy Mind Map Gives, which are focused on supporting research and building research-based tools to support those navigating their mental health journey. In addition to Healthy Mind Map, Mike is the founder and managing partner of Gardner Batt, which has developed real estate projects valued in excess of $2 billion, including several properties in Silicon Slopes. Prior to Gardner Batt, Mike was the general manager of Riverbend Holdings, a group of companies with operations ranging from ranching to radio broadcasting, as well as the general manager of the Utah Jazz retail operations in arena, as well as in 40 stores across 7 states. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Combination real estate, mental health.
Yeah. There's no logical connection.
So
it's all connected.
Okay, so tell me about the connection. Tell me about. So did you start? You didn't start in the mental health space.
I did not. I got a accounting degree from BYU. Went to work for the Jazz organization, running their retail stores. Originally in accounting and then in operations. Expanded that. Got sent by Larry Miller to Snowville, Utah, to run a cattle ranch for a couple months after he bought it up there. And then eventually ended up back in Idaho, where I grew up, working for a family office and doing real estate development, radio stations, gravel and asphalt companies, title companies, some IP. We did about everything under the sun. And then at some point decided to break off and came back down here to Utah and have been here since. So about 10 years. And you stayed in the real estate space then? So I stayed in the real estate space for the last 12 years. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, exited a number of the buildings that we'd built and decided it was time to do something a little different and transition to mental health. So.
And that's where the Healthy Mind Map came out.
Yeah.
So why? I mean, what was the genesis of that?
Mental health touches everybody.
Right.
Like nobody avoids it.
But not everyone does something about it. I'm wondering, why did you take the action?
Yeah, I think over the course of my career, I had employees that struggled with mental health. I sat with a couple of employees and coworkers whose spouses struggled significantly. In some cases, ended up taking their lives. My own family's been touched. I've had children, a spouse, siblings, nieces, nephews that have all experienced it in some way or another. And I think even myself situationally have experienced it, and to the extent that it's impacted my ability to work at times and work productively at times. And so as we went through this transition period with my business the last 3 or 4 years, just stopped and had some time to really pause and say, okay, I've got 20 more years. I've got 30 more years, whatever it is, right? And what do I do with that 20 years? And was in a fortunate situation to be able to have some flexibility and decide where do I want to spend my time and my energy and my accumulated experience and resources to do something that I felt passionate about, and decided that this was the place. So
I love that.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. It's everyone's experience is largely similar, just our lives being touched by mental health in one way or another.
Yeah.
Either we've experienced it ourselves or we have a first degree relationship with someone who has experienced it as well.
Yeah.
And so often we just, I don't know, I think it's because it's complex, it's difficult to deal with. And so oftentimes we just want to ignore it and we just think, well, just go away. Right. Or we distract ourselves away from it. I mean, I think that's, if mental health issues weren't a thing, I don't think Instagram or TikTok would be nearly as popular, right?
Right.
Because we wouldn't need the distractions. We'd be like, I feel great. I don't need to do this. I'll just go sit in my backyard and soak in the sun. But we don't need, but we want things to take our minds off what's going on that we don't like. And sometimes instead of looking for the long-term solutions, we look for the short-term things. So
yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Healthy Mind Map. Tell us about that. How does it work? What do you do?
Maybe I'll back up one step kind of again to this transition.
Sure.
So as I was going through and we sold a bunch of the properties that we developed, a couple of them here in Silicon Slopes, I had a good friend that had just gone off a layoff in the tech space as that bubble kind of rolled off, and he was struggling with some mental health challenges. And I had a son who was experience. He was going through junior high, and junior high is like a perfect storm, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And experiencing just some foundational anxiety, but then also some situational anxiety, and the two kind of coalesced at the time. And so I was going to some counseling sessions with him, and as I sat with my friend who was in a pretty dark place, and I sat with my son through counseling sessions, we just started to commiserate at first, really, about some of the joint pains that we were feeling through the process. And those ranged from the ambiguity of where we were at in the process. So I'd sit with my son in a counseling session, we'd walk out, and almost without fail, the first thing he'd do is turn to me and say, "Man, is this even working? Like, are we really getting somewhere?"
Yeah.
And then we'd try things and never know whether or not the things we were trying were actually moving the needle or not. The other thing that we often found is there was this recency bias. So when my son would go and sit down with the counselor would say, "How you doing?" And he'd say, I'm doing awesome, right? And he'd had a great day at school.
Right.
And I'd say, "Okay, wait, pause for just a minute. Let's talk about like the last 20 days and how those days went."
Right.
And he just had such a hard time like getting continuity of treatment in a way that was really reflective of his overall self and not just the last 15 minutes.
Right. Which is where an adolescent's mind is often going to be, right?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
And I think we're all a little bit there. Like I
sure,
sit, and if you ask me how I'm doing, I think to the last hour, and I say I'm doing pretty well or I'm not, right?
Right.
And so we sat down, and this friend of mine and I, and he was exploring a couple of different job options. I said, "Hey, you've got some tech background. We both have this shared lived experience. What if we were to come at this from a user's perspective, not necessarily from a clinical perspective? Neither of us have clinical training, but we both have a lot of lived experience and a lot of connections to people with lived experience. And what are the things that would help us if we were going through this, or as we are going through this, navigate the journey a little bit better than we have?" And so we started Healthy Mind Map and started to really explore from a user perspective. If I were to sit down with a therapist, what could I walk out of therapy with that would help me feel like I had a plan, would help me know whether or not therapy was working, if I needed to adjust the way that I was being treated? How could I take the things that I was learning in therapy and actually apply them outside of therapy? So much of the work really needs to happen outside of that hour block a week,
yes.
right? But I think we live in this society where we want someone else to think for us. And so we sit down and we say, "Hey, solve my problem in the next 50 minutes. Right. And then I walk away and I wonder why I still feel miserable. And so we wanted to give the ownership back to the individual and say, "Okay, we're going to let you see exactly where you're at." So one of the kind of foundational things in Healthy Mind Map is on an every other week basis, you take an assessment and you can see a chart of kind of how that's mapping out and what that looks like. And then identifying the things that you're working on and having a clear way to keep track of what you're working on, seeing a chart of how that's going, and then being able to overlay that against your mood, your assessment, and see whether or not the things you're doing are actually moving the needle and when you need to course correct.
Right. Interesting. So it basically provides a way to structure relatively unstructured emotional data, right? I mean, because the individual is having these experiences, and like the example of your son, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm doing great," right? Because the ride over was amazing. His favorite song was on the radio or something like that.
Right.
And so, but without the benefit, and obviously, like you said, the last 3 weeks, there's been a multitude of experiences, but if we don't have a way to categorize that, or that's why people will journal or things like that, right? And they'll write it down.
Right.
Otherwise, it just becomes this kind of, buzzing confusion in our heads.
Right.
And so I love that. It's a way for them to kind of articulate it in an organized fashion. And then I'm assuming that could be used with their professionals as well. They could go in and say, "Hey, this is how I've been feeling. Here's as I've been tracking my information." I would love that as a mental health professional. If the client came in and said, "Here's how I rated my mood for the last week," I'd be like, "That's amazing."
Well, and they can connect to a therapist, and the therapist can then have that data.
Nice.
And the user controls completely what they share. It's really a user focus. The practitioner can't actually input anything into it. It's completely user owned.
Just view only from the practitioner.
And then the other unique thing that we do is we pull in your biometric information. So if you wear a wearable, we pull in your heart rate, your HRV, your sleep, your exercise, any of that thing, or any of those things. So you can now map your anxiety score over the last 3 months compared to your sleep over the last 3 months. You can compare your exercise the last 3 months compared to your depression for the last 3 months. And you can start to see correlations between the things that you're working on. And there's some interesting research being done. We're working with the chief wellness officer at Duke University, who's doing a lot of work on biometric markers that actually predict a mental health episode 3 or 4 days before you'd ever mark it on an assessment. So by variations in your resting heart rate, variations in your HRV, you can actually flag and say, hey, in a couple of days, you're headed towards something that's difficult.
Interesting.
And so let's take a step back today and start to do some self-care in a way that can help intervene before you get to that point. So some interesting things that I think we can do with a little more data and a little more structure.
Yeah. I love that. I've always loved data.
Yeah.
My dad always wanted me to be in the hard sciences. He thought that would be the best thing for me. And I kind of grew up with a very analytical mind. I have brothers that are engineers and that. And then, of course, I went into the softest science of all, if you can even call it a science, right? Psychology. We like to think we're a science. I don't know that we really are. But I've always been fascinated by gathering information and then organizing it in a way that makes sense to, and of value to the user. So I love that, how they're able to see that and even being able to predict things. That's very interesting because I don't know, because then if you think it's going to happen and you're aware of it, it probably won't.
Yeah, I mean, it has a little bit of a self-fulfilling.
Totally, yes.
And just being able to visualize. I think being able to see where you're at, see where you're going, know what's going on around you is a unique thing in the mental health space. It feels like such a black box at times, right?
Absolutely.
You stick your hand in, you kind of juggle it around and pull out whatever you pull out. But if I can start to put some visualization around it, can I start to manage it a little bit differently? And then can we take big data that's out in the marketplace that says, hey, this is what sleep should look like. And can we bring that in and apply it in a small data setting to you individually and say, hey, based on where you're at and the various things we're seeing, here's a couple of recommendations that are very tailored to you as an individual.
I think that's so valuable because you're right. It is very much a black box in a lot of ways. We have great research-backed tools that we can use and therapies that have been, demonstrated clinically to be effective. But all of that is highly dependent upon the user,
right?
And the feedback you get from them, and it's all subjective,
right?
And that's the thing, is that every diagnosis is all based on user-generated content.
Right.
What they tell you is happening, and that's the only way you can tell. You cannot take a liter of blood, or not a liter. A vial of blood, take a liter of blood, you're going to have a problem. Right? You take a vial of blood and say, oh, you've got this much depression and this much anxiety. It doesn't manifest that way. Even in brain scanning, we've become a little more sophisticated with that, but we're not even close to being able to say, okay, this is what the brain, is going to look like in chronic anxiety or chronic depression all the time. So finding a way to manage the user information, I think, is amazing. I love that. So as we try to increase awareness in general of mental health, what are the challenges you've seen with that? Are you seeing good adoption with this? Because some people will be like, well, I don't need to use that and my mental health is fine, or.
So the stage that we're at, we went through a clinical kind of beta test with 120 different therapists, and concluded that in the end of 2025. And we had a number of end users that were using it and gathered a bunch of feedback. So we're now actually going back, making some tweaks.
Okay.
And then in the course of the next 2 or 3 months, we'll come out with kind of a revised version based on our beta testing. But the overall response has been very positive. I think clinicians in general, at times are frustrated that their clients aren't taking the things that they're talking about and putting them into practice.
Totally.
And sometimes it's a function of the client may not be in a place where they have the clarity of mind to know exactly how to put it into practice. So if I can walk out of a therapy session with a tool to measure how I'm doing and a tool to implement the things that I talked about, And it may be simple. It may be as easy as, it may be that I'm tracking my mood. I'm taking an assessment once a week and I'm trying to make my bed.
Yep.
Right. But if even at that degree, if I can have a simple way to track that I'm making my bed, so when I go back to my therapist, I have some accountability on how that worked. And if it didn't work, then I can have that conversation as well. So we've had very positive response from the therapist group.
Yes.
I think the next step that we're working on now is, can we not only gather your data, let you self-analyze your data, but can we then take and look for the correlations for you? Can we take the journal entries that you make or the mood entries that you make and take both the qualitative and the quantitative data and give you a synopsis? So when you walk into your therapy session, you can say, okay, let me just read this one paragraph of what happened in the last 3 weeks. And let me show you the chart of how that's what appears to be correlated. And now we can actually have a conversation that's reflective of the last 3 weeks, and we can talk about the real issues that I may have forgotten since they actually happened.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
like your son, right?
yeah, totally.
Everything's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Is your target audience more the clinicians? I mean, and then the clinicians maybe saying, "Hey, we've got this great tool that we could use." What's your marketing strategy?
So we've done both.
Okay.
We've been to a number of conferences. We've really coordinated with clinicians to make sure that the experience feels right.
Right.
And we have a clinical director. We've worked with a couple of different professors at different universities to make sure that we're really aligned with research. But the end user is really the primary target.
Right.
If they're not getting better, doesn't matter how awesome the tool is. It doesn't matter if it works for the clinician or not. If it doesn't work for the individual that's sitting in the seat, that's struggling, that's in the dark, then we've missed the mark.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it could eventually, I mean, although that's amazing data for the clinician, it could also be used for the individual almost as a like a tool of health as opposed to a tool of remediation. Right. Like someone who's not necessarily struggling and saying, I need to go see a counselor because I've got all this anxiety or all this depression. They can say, I feel good most of the time, but I would like to understand my situation better. I'd like to see the days when I do feel better than other days. We feel stress periodically.
Right.
Everyone does. And wouldn't it be great to be able to reflect on that and say, okay, well, this is what was happening on that day when I was feeling stressed. My wife's been doing that for 20 years just journaling every night.
Yeah.
She writes down her emotional experience she had that day, and then some of the things that she experienced she had, the thoughts she had associated with that. And it's just a goldmine of information for her to go back and look at that and say, oh, then you start to see patterns emerge from that. I would love if we could get more tools available in society that are focused on prevention in mental health and not just remediation.
Yeah. One of the fascinating things as we've been working with Duke on this conversation is they've done a lot of work around resting heart rate and the likelihood of an employee to quit. And there's a direct correlation that says, within a population, you may have a group of, one department that has a steady heart rate and another department that on a 60-day versus 60-day basis has had an elevated increase in resting heart rate, and the attrition rate in that department with the elevated heart rate is much higher than that with a consistent one. And so even from a self-reflection perspective, if I can get if I'm adding some qualitative journaling information, I add my biometric in there, can it flag me and say, hey, you really need to address the stressors that are happening in this area, or it will end poorly. Right. And then finding a way in a non-big brotherish way to be able to help organizations identify departments, areas where they maybe need to focus their wellness. Instead of a blanket wellness program, do we really need to identify jobs that may be particularly stressful within an organization and make sure that we're adding some additional resources there, adding some additional support to the individuals there.
Yeah. I think that's very valuable. And that's why I think like you said, the user has to have the one with the major buy-in, because at some point they have to decide, are they willing to share that information in the aggregate, right? Or even specifically. And that's fascinating because in those correlational studies, you wonder what's the X factor, right? I mean, what is it? And you don't know. We don't know. I mean, there's probably not a causal effect between increased heart rate and
Right.
and quitting your job, but knowing that something might be on the horizon is good information. Just say,
Right.
you know, the experience you're having right now, people that have that experience are more likely to do these sorts of things.
Right.
If you don't want to do those sorts of things, then now's a great time to talk
Yeah.
to someone or to think, you know, carefully about your
Right.
situation. Whereas too often we miss all of those warning signs and we just end up in the hospital.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're such a society of, I'll deal with it when it's a crisis,
Of course.
especially in the mental health space, right?
Yes.
And I'm guilty of it as well. Like until it got bad enough that I really needed to address it, I ignored it, like you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So if we can start to provide some tools that allow individuals to address things before they become a problem and predict trends of where they're headed, you know, hopefully if we can visualize it and help them see it, we can help them address it before it's at that point. And I think that helps from a healthcare cost perspective. It helps from an employment turnover perspective. I mean, there's so many implications of letting it get to crisis that if we can avoid those, we'll be ahead of the game.
100%. Yeah, there's the preventative mental health space is wide open, I think. And I think there's one thing like you're talking about, you know, developing kind of the road signs to say this is what's ahead. And then there's the other thing of then what do we do?
Right.
I was just talking with someone earlier, and I mean, it's been 30 years since I got my doctoral training in psychology, but we didn't talk about prevention.
Right.
We talked about remediation.
Right.
And I think it's still kind of like that. We know how to treat problems when they're a problem.
Right.
But I don't know that there's a huge body of work out there that this is what you do to avoid the problem in the first place. Maybe there is, and I'm just not seeing it. But that's what we need.
Yeah.
Not only do we need to direct people there, but we need to have something when they get there.
Right.
Right. Say these are the types of things that you can do to prevent that.
Yeah.
I also love that because it's an empowering situation.
Right.
When we're reactive and we get stuck and we end up in the emergency room or the counselor's office, we just feel defeated, right? Because I couldn't do it, I failed. As opposed to, hey, there's a problem that might be coming. What can I do about that? Then you feel like you're the champion of it.
Yeah. Now, there's some fascinating research that's happening in North Carolina right now that talks about 10 emotions that we can engender that will actually prevent, I don't know if prevent's the right word, but strongly aid. And they include things like gratitude, awe.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. And they've shown that if you spend 10 minutes a day for 7 days, really being deeply grateful, that has like a 4-month residual tail on it. And, and there's other things like doing something kind for someone that maybe has a 48-hour life to it. And so if we can start to identify, is this a situational issue? Is this a trait issue that you're dealing with? Can we start to apply some micro interventions early that can help pave the way for just a smoother path?
Yeah, I think so. I think the analog to physical health is exactly the same, right? If you want to have good physical health, and let's say you're starting out as reasonably healthy, you don't have to do much to stay healthy. Right. There's a few things you need to do. You need to move a little bit every day, and you need to avoid, probably putting some things in your body every day, but it doesn't, but it's, they're relatively simple things that don't require a ton of effort. The problem is when you've got the terrible diagnosis because you've let yourself go for 2 or 3 years. And then I had a good friend who lost her life that way because by the time she got to the point where her health was so terrible, and then the remediation was all these things, right? All the medications and all these things. She didn't want to do any of them because she felt terrible.
Right.
And she just kind of spiraled to the point where she lost her life.
Right.
But I think mental health is the same way. If we can identify those small things that we can do every day, doing them consistently over time, that'll benefit you, like you said, even in the short term, the 48 hours or the week-long thing. Right. But it changes the way our brain thinks about things. It changes those neuronal connections. Right. And then all of a sudden we become people of gratitude. We become people of awe. Right. And the trick is consistency over time. And we're not great at that as human beings, especially something that's difficult.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some simple things coming back to your earlier question about how do we, in the workplace, how do we make this impactful, right? I think it's identifying those micro interventions. And I think if we went out and assumed that everyone was struggling with the mental health challenge, we all are to some degree.
We'd be right about 90% of the time.
Yeah. And if you're not now, then you might be in 6 months. And so if we can start to establish a framework and an attitude about it that allows us to just accept it for what it is. Health is health, right? Mental health is health.
Exactly.
And can we start to encourage employees, encourage their families to start paying heed today before it becomes crisis? I just think there's lots of work that we can do in this space.
I agree. I think that has to start from the top down, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
really does.
The leadership has to just accept that fact.
Yeah.
That mental health is a part of what every single one of their employees is dealing with.
Yeah.
And it's less effective to say, to have a big hurrah every May, on Mental Health Awareness Month, and on their onboarding, tell them about the AAP, but you don't talk about it for the next 2 years or whatever. That's still just a super remedial model.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that they're thinking, well, we don't have the time, we don't have the energy or the capital to be able to do these huge things all the time. But it's what you're saying.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the huge things.
Yeah.
It's small things sustained over time.
Yeah. And I think as I look back on my last 20, 30 years in business, you don't not have the time. Like I think there's, I look back at times when, whether it was myself or my family, and that's the other thing that I'd address is it's not just the employee. Like if you've got a spouse or a child that's struggling with it, like it erodes creativity. Yep. It erodes productivity. It erodes your ability to focus on a task at hand. And so it's not just the employee.
Absolutely.
It expands to their whole circle.
Right. Anyone that's they're directly connected.
Right.
With. Yeah.
And so I can look during periods of my career when, I just couldn't have a creative idea, right? Because I was so worried about a situation that felt very crisis-like, that had I been able to step back as an individual, or had leadership who was mindful enough to really intervene proactively versus reactively, I think my dips could have been shallower, my peaks could have been higher, and I could have created more than I even created. Had we just, as you mentioned, from the top down, really acknowledged it for what it is, acknowledged that everybody has, whether it be situational or more physiological struggles, accept it. It's just a part of who our society is.
Right.
And so let's address it as such.
I love that.
Yeah.
Mike, thanks so much for coming in and talking and sharing your wisdom and experience. It's been delightful for me.
Yeah, pleasure to be with you.
Where can they find out more about Healthy Mind Map?
So if they go to healthymindmap.com, it's free. It's a free tool for individuals, clinicians. The goal is really to build an impactful tool. And so we'd love to collaborate with companies. We don't know the answer to this. I think it's a problem that doesn't have an answer right now. And so our goal is to bring together great minds, bring together great companies. If you've got a group that is interested in doing something better, we're here to support you, and both from a research, from our foundational side, as well as from a company side. We're here to help. So healthymindmap.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And thanks everyone for listening today. Remember that change starts with you, and together we increase our mental health momentum.